What do you do when you come home early and see your wife in tears, while your grown son laughs with his in-laws in your kitchen like nothing is wrong? How far can quiet disrespect go before a calm father decides to answer it with contracts, not shouting? This is how my family learned that the silent owner is not as powerless as they thought. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Victor, and for most of my life, I thought I understood my place in this family. I was the quiet builder in the background. I was the one who signed the contracts, checked the drawings, made sure walls did not crack and roofs did not leak. At home, I was the one who fixed broken chairs and leaking taps. I never needed loud praise. I just wanted a normal kind of respect. The simple feeling that my house was my home, not a station where I pay for everyone and wait in the corner. That morning, I came back from my trip one day earlier than planned. It was not a long journey. Only 3 days on a construction site in another town, but my back ached and my legs felt heavy. I had a small travel bag on my shoulder and dust on my shoes. The taxi dropped me at the gate, and when I stepped out, I felt a small wave of warmth. I always liked the way our house looked from the street. I designed it myself many years ago, before my son grew taller than me, before the in-laws started to treat it like their casual hotel. I did not tell anyone that I was coming early. I wanted to see the house in its natural state, so to say. I thought maybe I would walk in, hear my wife's voice in the kitchen, maybe smell soup on the stove. I imagined putting the bag down, taking off my shoes, and just sitting with her on the sofa for a quiet hour. No business talk, no spreadsheets, no discussion about the next project, just us. When I opened the front door, I noticed first that the hallway light was on, even though it was still bright outside. Several pairs of shoes were scattered near the door, not in the shoe rack. 2 pairs were mine and Anna's. The other pairs belonged to my son and his wife, and 1 pair I recognized as Caroline's, my daughter-in-law's mother. Her shoes had that shiny finish that always left small marks on the floor, like little circles of another person's taste. I stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind me. The house did not smell like soup. It smelled like strong coffee and some heavy perfume that did not belong to Anna. From somewhere in the back of the house, I heard loud laughter rising and falling, mixed with clinking dishes. It came from the kitchen. It was not the soft kind of laughter you share at the end of a long day. It was the sharp, bright kind that fills a place with the feeling that someone is performing for an audience. Before I went to the kitchen, I turned my head toward the living room. At first, I thought the room was empty. The curtains were half closed, and the light from the hallway did not reach the far end of the sofa. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw Anna sitting there. She was in the corner of the big couch, shoulders tense, her hands twisted together in her lap. Her hair was pulled back, but small strands had escaped and stuck to her cheeks. Her eyes were red, as if she had wiped them many times. She lifted her head when she heard my steps. For a second, she looked like someone who woke up from a bad dream and did not know where she was. Then she recognized me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried to smile and failed. Instead, she wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, like a child who does not want to be caught crying. I asked her what happened. I kept my voice low. I did not want the kitchen to hear us yet. She shook her head and looked toward the sound of laughter. She said that everything was fine, that I must be tired, that we would talk later. Her voice was thin. It did not sound like fine. It sounded like someone who used up all her words already and had nothing left except 2 or 3 simple phrases that helped keep the peace a little longer. The laughter from the kitchen grew louder. Someone said something about modern plans and old habits and a new future for the house. I recognized my son's voice. It carried that casual confidence that he used with clients sometimes, the kind that makes people think he already knows the answer to a question he did not even hear. I put my bag down next to the armchair and told Anna I would just say hello. She reached out as if to stop me, then pulled her hand back and lowered her eyes. That small movement said more to me than any words she could have used. In that moment, the house did not feel like mine. It felt like a place where my wife was trying not to disturb guests in her own living room. I walked down the short corridor to the kitchen. The doorway framed a picture that I had seen too many times lately. My son Lucas stood near the fridge, one hand on the counter, a glass in the other. He was laughing at something Frank, his father-in-law, had just said. Frank sat at the table with a big plate in front of him, leaning back in his chair like he was in his own home. Nora, my daughter-in-law, sat next to him, scrolled through something on her phone, and showed it to her mother, Caroline, who gave a loud laugh and covered her mouth with her hand in a theatrical way. They did not notice me at first. Their eyes were inside that little circle they made for themselves, an invisible wall around the kitchen table. My travel bag marks on the floor did not exist for them. My wife in the dark living room did not exist for them. Only their bright voices and their plans seemed real. I stepped into the kitchen and said a simple greeting. Lucas turned his head slowly, like he was pulled out of a pleasant dream. His eyes went over my face, then over my clothes, then down to my dusty shoes. He gave a small grin, the kind someone gives to a person who arrived at the wrong time. He asked why I was back early, and if the trip was so easy that I could just leave. He said it in a tone that made the question sound like a comment. I told him that the work was done faster than expected, and that I thought it would be nice to come home. I did not mention how tired I was. I did not mention that I had spent most of the last 3 days on my feet, checking beams and talking to workers in the rain. Frank raised his glass slightly in my direction and said something about successful projects. Then he turned back to Lucas and asked what they were just saying about the house. Lucas picked up the subject again as if nothing had changed with my arrival. He started to tell them about his vision for the place. He said they had been talking about how the house could be more efficient. He said that if we turned one part of the ground floor into a separate guest wing, Nora's parents would have their own space and would not need to keep traveling back and forth. He spoke as if this idea was already decided, as if the bricks were already laid and the walls already painted. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at Caroline and Frank, searching their faces for approval. Caroline nodded with that slow approval that used to belong to me when I finished a good drawing. She said that it made sense for the younger generation to take over the house and the company because times were changing. She added that older people should rest and trust their children. She said it lightly, almost like a joke, but there was a firm message inside the softness of her words. I watched Lucas talk about the company next. He told them how he wanted to modernize the image, how he had started to use company cards for more networking events, how he planned to rebrand our longtime suppliers if they did not fit his new style. He said that clients liked seeing younger faces. He did not say that those clients were the same people who used to shake my hand on muddy sites and ask for my advice on structures. He did not say that his name on the sign was there because I had built something first. I asked where Anna was in their plans for the house. The kitchen grew a little quieter for 1 second. Nora answered that my wife worried too much and that these were practical talks. Lucas said that Anna was too soft-hearted for hard decisions, that he would take care of things so she would not have to think about them. He said it with an air of generosity, as if this was a gift. I felt a small, cold line form in my chest. It did not feel like anger. It felt more like a straight edge drawn on paper with a ruler. Clear, hard, simple. I looked at Lucas and asked in the same calm tone if he had checked any of these ideas with me before presenting them as facts. He shrugged and said he had not wanted to bother me on my trip. He repeated that I needed rest and that I should not think about papers and signatures all the time. The words papers and signatures landed in my mind like small pins. I designed my life around those things. Every beam we put up, every contract signed, every loan paid back, every late night in the office, they all sat on those papers. I looked at his face and saw that he thought they were just little formal details that had to catch up with his plans. As he talked, I noticed something else. On the table, near Lucas's hand, lay one of the company credit cards. It was face up, my name printed on it. Next to it was a white shopping bag with a brand name I knew well, an expensive store in the city. The bag was full. Caroline's eyes moved toward it with a small, satisfied look, and Nora reached for it with an excited gesture. I did not say anything yet. I simply sat down on the free chair, more to watch than to join. I listened to them talk about my house in the third person, as if I was not there, as if I was a distant relative they had to inform out of respect, but not involve in decisions. My phone lay in my pocket, silent, a soft weight against my leg. I had not checked it since I left the taxi. I felt it vibrate once, a small movement that cut through the noise of their conversation. I took it out and saw a new notification on the screen from the bank. It was a fresh alert, sent just a few minutes before I walked into the kitchen. There was a message about a large new charge on my company card, the same card lying on the table. The alert showed the name of the store, the same brand on the white bag. The sum was higher than some of my workers earned in a month. I looked at the number on the screen, then at the bag, then at Lucas's hand resting next to the card he had taken for granted. The room was still full of voices, but for me, everything became very quiet inside. I sat there with the phone in my hand and the bank alert on the screen. It felt like the house changed shape around me. The walls were the same color, the table was the same table I had built years ago, but something was different. It was as if I had stepped out of my own place and into a scene where I was a visitor. Lucas kept talking about his vision for the company. He spoke about new logos, new cars, maybe even a new office in a more modern part of town. Caroline and Frank nodded and asked questions about parties, sponsors, big events. They liked the sound of big numbers. I watched their faces and thought about the workers who had spent nights on scaffolding in the rain. I did not start a fight. That has never been my way. I put the phone down, turned the screen face down, and said that I needed a shower after my trip. Lucas barely reacted. He told me to rest and not worry, that he had everything under control. The last part carried a small smile, like a little victory for him. On my way out of the kitchen, I passed the living room again. Anna still sat on the sofa, but now she was staring at the television. The screen was on, but the sound was low, like a soft noise to keep her from feeling alone. I sat down next to her and told her quietly that I was back for good, that the trip went well. She nodded, but her eyes did not shine like they usually did when she was happy to see me. I asked again if something had happened while I was away. At first she said no, that it was just talk, that she was tired. Then, slowly, she told me that the last days had been full of plans discussed over meals in that same kitchen. She said that Lucas and the in-laws talked as if our house belonged to a group council. They even discussed which rooms could be cleared to make space for a private area only for Nora's parents. Anna said that when she asked where she would keep the things that belonged to her parents, they told her to relax, that it was time to update the house. She repeated their words in a flat tone, as if the phrases were heavy objects she had to carry. Listening to her, I felt an old tiredness rise in me, the kind that is not about muscles, but about years. I thought back to how all of this started, long before Lucas began to speak like a manager in his own mind. There was a time when this house was full of dust and echoes instead of furniture and visitors. I could still see myself standing in the middle of an empty concrete shell with rolled-up drawings under my arm and a cheap thermos of coffee at my feet. Back then, I was not a company owner in my head. I was just a man with a small team, an old truck, and a quiet fear that the next month might be the last if a client did not pay on time. I remembered the first winter after we moved in. We had no heavy curtains, no good sofa, and no proper heating in half of the rooms. I slept in thick socks and an old sweater because I kept the thermostat low to save money. Anna learned how to cook 3 different meals from the same simple ingredients, stretching every coin. When Lucas was small, he would run through the empty rooms and shout just to hear the echo. He thought it was a game. For us, it was the sound of a house not finished yet, but we loved it because it was ours. I built the company in the same careful way, one wall at a time, one contract at a time. I took strange jobs that nobody wanted, repaired old buildings, took over projects where other teams had walked away. I came home covered in dust, but when I looked at my sleeping family, the tiredness felt like a price I was willing to pay. Lucas watched me through all those years. As a child, he sat on the floor of my little office and drew his own houses on scrap paper. He liked the idea of building, but he did not see the meetings at the bank, the late nights with numbers, the worry in my stomach when a client was slow to pay. He saw only the final shape. His father with keys, his father with staff, his father with a truck that had our name on the side. Later, when he became a teenager, he grew impatient with my slow way of doing things. He said that everything took too long. He complained that I did not invest in big billboards or flashy ads. I told him that I preferred paying workers and suppliers on time to putting money into signs. He said I thought too small and that younger people did things differently now. At that time, his words slid off me like rain off a coat. I thought he would grow out of it. Then came the health scare. One day on a site, my chest felt tight and the world went a bit gray around the edges. Workers took me to the hospital. I did not lose consciousness, but the memory of the bright lights and the smell of disinfectant stayed with me. I lay on a narrow bed and looked at the ceiling tiles, thinking about all the unfinished jobs and unpaid invoices, and about Anna sitting in a chair nearby with her hands folded. Lucas came to the hospital with Nora and her parents. They were concerned, of course, but I also saw a different look in his eyes. It was not only fear, it was a sudden awareness that the company existed in a fragile way around one person. He told me later that he felt responsible now, that he had to step up. I was proud of him for wanting to help, but I was also not ready to hand him the keys in the way he imagined. I gave him a role at the company as operations manager. I added his name to certain accounts as a user, not as an owner. I walked him through contracts and taught him how to read terms and conditions. I pointed at clauses and tried to explain why they mattered. He smiled and said that it was interesting, but I could tell that his attention drifted to the idea of being the one in charge. Over time, he started to enjoy the social side of the job more than the technical side. He liked meeting clients in cafes instead of on sites. He liked being seen at events. When I asked him about specific details of a building, he answered in broad strokes. When I talked about foundation depth and load-bearing walls, he changed the topic to marketing ideas. Around the same period, he and Nora asked to move into the house for a year. They said it would help them save money for their own place. Anna was happy at first. She liked having them close. She imagined grandchildren running around the halls one day. I agreed, but I set a clear mental line. They were still guests, even if they were family. Nora's parents started visiting more often. At first, they stayed for weekends, then for whole weeks. Caroline said that the house felt so big and empty, and that it made sense for the family to use it fully. I noticed how they placed their things in the guest room not like visitors, but like people who slowly build a second base. A coat here, a pair of shoes there, a few boxes in the corner. I told Anna once that I felt like the house was shifting under our feet. She told me that it was still ours, that I was being too sensitive. She asked me not to create distance between Lucas and his in-laws. She said that Nora would be hurt if her parents felt unwelcome. Her voice carried so much hope for peace that I pushed my own concerns down into a quiet drawer in my mind. At the office, the shift was more visible. On days when I arrived later than Lucas, I saw how the younger staff looked to him for instructions. It was not a problem at first. I wanted him to learn. But soon I heard him refer to himself as the head of the company in front of suppliers. Once, in the open plan office, I overheard a conversation where he told someone that his father was moving into retirement mode and that he was taking over operations completely. When I asked him about that later, he said that it was just a way to make clients feel safe about continuity. He insisted that it meant nothing in practice. He said that I should be happy he spoke with such confidence. I wanted to believe him, so I did not press. Money started to move in new ways. One evening, I sat at my desk with a pile of bank statements and noticed unfamiliar entries. Restaurant bills that looked more like celebrations than meetings, store names that had nothing to do with construction. When I asked my accountant, Matteo, about them, he told me that Lucas had started using the company card more often. Matteo did not judge out loud. He simply pointed at the numbers and said that they were growing. He reminded me that company funds are not a personal wallet, even for an owner, and especially not for someone who is not an owner at all. His tone was gentle, but his eyes were serious. We met one afternoon at a small cafe near the office. The place was quiet, with simple tables and a smell of roasted coffee beans. I liked it there because nobody tried to impress anyone. People just drank coffee and read newspapers. Matteo spread a few sheets on the table and showed me the pattern. He said that since Lucas became operations manager, there was a rising amount of unclassified expenses. They were taped to meetings, to networking, to image, but they did not bring clear results in contracts or new clients. He also said that Nora's parents often appeared in the receipts as guests at company-paid meals. He told me that as long as I allowed it, the bank and the tax office would treat it as my choice. The responsibility was mine. He said gently that sometimes, when a father trusts his son too much, he forgets that papers do not recognize emotions. They only recognize signatures and numbers. I sat there, listening, and suddenly the scene from my kitchen with the white shopping bag made even more sense. That bag was not the first or the last. It was part of a longer line of quiet little moves that slowly changed who really carried the weight in this story. The memory of my hospital stay came back again. I remembered how Lucas stood at the foot of the bed and told me that I did not have to worry anymore, that he would take over. At the time, those words had felt like warmth. Now, thinking about his easy tone in the kitchen, they sounded less like support and more like a script in his own head, a story where he was already the main character. I left the cafe with the folder under my arm and the taste of strong coffee in my mouth. The sun outside was low, throwing long shadows on the pavement. I walked slowly, thinking about how far I had stepped back over the years, always in the name of peace, always trusting that my quiet work spoke for itself. By the time I reached my car, one thought stood clear in my mind. If I wanted respect again in my own house and my own company, I could not rely on memories or feelings. I would have to look at the same things that the bank and the office looked at: papers, roles, and who actually owned what. A few days after I came back from the trip, Lucas called for what he called a family talk. He chose the living room, not the kitchen this time. That alone already told me something. The living room in his mind was now a kind of meeting space, not a place where my wife and I could sit in peace. When I walked in, the scene looked prepared. Lucas sat in the armchair where I usually sat. Caroline and Frank shared the sofa, leaning back like they were comfortable leaders of some informal council. Nora sat next to her mother, with a notebook on her lap and a pen in her hand. Anna sat on a small chair closer to the wall, as if she had taken the last free place in her own house. Lucas asked me to sit down because, as he said, they had some important matters to discuss about the future of the house and the company. He spoke slowly and clearly, using that tone people use when they have practiced a speech in their heads many times. I sat on the other end of the sofa, opposite him. I folded my hands and waited. He started by saying that he appreciated what I had built. He said that I had done a lot, that nobody denied that. His voice sounded polite on the surface, but underneath I heard something like a closing chapter. Then he moved quickly to a new subject. He said that times were changing, that the company needed bolder steps, and that the house needed a more practical arrangement. He took a folder from the coffee table and held it up. He said that they had spoken with a friend who worked with contracts. He explained that there was a simple way to make things easier for everyone. If I signed a few papers, Lucas could act more freely as the official head of the company and could make decisions about the house without always asking me or Anna. He added that this would save me from stress. He said that at my age I should not have to think about every small detail. Nora nodded and said that this was a natural step, that in many families the younger generation took over like this. Caroline said that older people sometimes hold on to things too long and make life harder for everyone. I watched their faces as they talked about my age, my stress, my future, as if I were a distant subject, not a person sitting right in front of them. I then looked at Anna. She was staring at her hands. She did not reach for the folder. Her shoulders were tense. It was clear to me that this talk was not new to her. They had already prepared her for this moment. Lucas placed the folder on the table in front of me. He said that these were pre-prepared forms that would allow him to manage the company and the house in case something happened to me. He added quickly that nothing had to happen, but that it was smart to be ready. He said that his friend had told him it was normal to set things up this way. I did not touch the folder. I asked calmly whether he had shown these papers to any lawyer who understood our specific contracts and history. He replied that it was not necessary, that these were standard forms, and that I should just trust him. Frank added that in his own business days he had done something similar and that it made things easier. The more they spoke, the clearer it became to me that they saw this as a small formality. In their picture, I just had to put my name on a few lines, and then their plans for renovations, for a permanent room for Nora's parents, for bigger company spending would go from talk to reality. For a second, I imagined another man in my place, one who might feel weak after a health scare, one who might sign just to keep the peace, one who might think that fighting his own son in front of in-laws would break the family. I understood how easy it would be to just pick up the pen and tell myself that this was the way things had to go. But another picture came into my mind. I saw the empty concrete shell of this house again. I saw the first simple door I hung with my own hands. I saw Anna's smile when she walked into our bedroom for the first time. I saw my company stamp on the first big contract I ever signed. All those images stood between my hand and that folder. I told Lucas that I did not sign anything without reading it properly and without showing it to a lawyer I trusted. I said that if he truly believed there was nothing risky inside, he should not be afraid of a professional check. My voice stayed calm. I did not raise it. There was no shaking in it. It sounded almost like a man discussing a small detail in a building plan. Lucas's face changed a little. The easy smile left his eyes. He said that I was overcomplicating everything, that I never trusted him fully, that this was about confidence in the next generation. Nora said that I was letting fear control me. Caroline added that waiting too long to change things can lead to unpleasant scenes later. I replied that if the papers were so normal, waiting a few days would not hurt anyone. I pushed the folder slowly back toward the center of the table. I did not push it off the table or tear it. I simply refused to let it cross the last bit of space between us. The air in the room grew heavy. Frank looked at Lucas with a small frown, as if his plan had hit a wall he did not expect. Lucas leaned back and crossed his arms. He said that he did not want to argue, but that he had tried to do the responsible thing. He said that if I wanted to slow things down, it would only make the company look weak. His words were meant to make me feel guilty. Anna finally spoke, in a quiet voice. She said that she did not like any talk that made it sound like I was already gone. She said that she was not ready to live in a house ruled by a council. The room went quiet for a moment. Her words did not change their plan, but they broke the smooth surface of their story. The talk ended with no agreement. Lucas gathered the folder, clearly upset. Caroline and Frank exchanged looks that said more than any sentence. They did not shout, but their silence carried a message. They were not used to hearing no in their plans. Later that week, at the office, I saw another side of the same pattern. I walked into the open plan area earlier than usual and stopped when I heard my name. Lucas was standing by the window, talking to a supplier on the phone. He did not see me. He said that he was taking full control soon, that his father was almost retired in practice, and just helped on sites because he was bored at home. He laughed softly when he said it. The words did not hurt in an emotional way. They settled into place like pieces of a puzzle. I understood now how he presented himself to others. He had already told his own story many times. In his version, I was a shadow that would soon fade, leaving space for his bright plans. I did not step forward. I waited until he finished the call. Then I walked past him as if I had just arrived. He greeted me politely and asked about a site report. I handed him the file and did not mention what I had heard. I did not need to argue with a version of me that lived only in his words. That evening I went home and walked straight to my office. The door to that room still had an old lock. I had not used the key in some time. When I turned it in the lock, the small click sounded louder than usual. It was like opening a box I had forgotten. Inside the room, the furniture was simple. A desk, a chair, shelves with folders and old drawings. In the corner stood a metal cabinet, heavier than it looked. That cabinet held old contracts, house papers, company registration documents, and other things I had not touched in years because daily life seemed more urgent. I sat at the desk for a moment and just looked at the cabinet. It represented all the slow, careful steps of my life that nobody in the kitchen wanted to think about now. While they enjoyed big talk about plans, I had lived inside those papers for decades. Banks, clients, suppliers, tax offices, all of them had met me first through the words in those files. I stood up, took the key ring from the desk drawer, and found the small flat key for the cabinet. When I opened it, I saw rows of folders with labels that my own hand had written: company registration, share structure, house purchase, mortgage paid, trust draft, emergency instructions. Some labels were faded, but clear enough. I took out the folder with the house title and the old draft for a trust that my lawyer, Lena, had once prepared after my health scare. At the time, she said that it would be wise to think about protection for Anna and clear rules for the house if something ever happened to me. I had not signed it then. I was stubborn and thought I still had plenty of time. Now, holding those papers, I realized that they were not symbols of my weakness. They were exactly the opposite. They were proof that for all these years, I had always thought a few steps ahead, even when I forgot about it later. The law still saw me as the owner of the house and the company. No talk in the living room had changed that yet. I spread the documents on the desk. My hands were steady. I read the names, numbers, and lines. I checked each part carefully, the way I check drawings for a bridge. I did not rush. The more I read, the calmer I felt. Then I took my phone from my pocket and opened my contacts. My thumb hovered over several names. For a moment, I thought about calling Lucas to talk again, but I knew that talk would not change anything. He would use the same phrases, the same tone, the same pressure. I needed someone who spoke a different language, the language of papers and structures. My thumb moved to Lena's name. I had not called her in a long time. She was the one who helped me set up the company in the early days and who had drawn that first trust draft after my hospital visit. I pressed the call button and put the phone to my ear. As the line rang, I looked at the open cabinet and the papers on the desk. I thought about Anna, sitting small in the living room while people made plans over her head. I thought about the way Lucas had called me almost retired to a supplier. I thought about the shopping bag next to my company card. When Lena answered, I did not complain. I simply told her that there had been some changes in my family's behavior and that I wanted to review the house and company papers with her. I said that I needed to understand exactly where I stood. She listened and said that we could meet in her office soon. Her voice was calm, professional, and steady. After the call, I sat in the quiet room and felt something settle inside me. It was not joy, not anger, not even relief. It was a clear decision. I would stop trying to keep peace by giving away ground I had built with my own hands. If my son and his in-laws wanted to talk about future plans, they would have to meet the real structure, not the picture in their heads. Lena's office was in an older building in the center, on the 3rd floor, with a small metal sign next to the door. I had walked through that door many years ago, when all of this was still new. Back then, I carried a folder with a dream inside it. Now I carried a folder with my life inside it. When I stepped in, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The waiting area was simple. 2 chairs, a plant that had seen better days, and a low table with magazines. I did not sit. Her assistant recognized me and told me that Lena would see me in a moment. I looked out the window at the street below and watched people hurry with their own problems, none of them knowing that on this floor a small storm was about to shift direction. Lena greeted me with the same quiet smile I remembered. Time had added a few lines to both our faces, but her eyes were still sharp. She invited me to sit at the table in her office, not across a big desk, but at a smaller round table in the corner. She always liked to talk at the same level as her clients, not opposite them like a judge. I placed my worn folder on the table and opened it. There lay the house title, the company registration documents, the shareholder list, and the old draft of the trust. The papers looked the same as before, but my view of them had changed. I felt like I was finally reading my own story instead of just living inside its walls. I told Lena in simple terms what had been going on. I did not dramatize it. I said that my son and his in-laws had started to act as if they already owned the house and the company. I explained that they held talks in my living room about practical steps and future control, that they wanted quick signatures, that they used company funds for personal comfort. Lena listened without interrupting. She asked a few clear questions, the kind that go straight to the point. She wanted to know whose names were on which accounts, who had rights of signature at the bank, whether Lucas's role at the company was defined on paper or only in habit. She did not ask how I felt. She knew that feelings were important, but she also knew that the places where I could act were on the page. Then she picked up the company registration document and read it line by line. Her finger moved down the columns. She pointed at my name as the only founder and main shareholder. She reminded me that the company was not a gift from the air. It was a legal structure built with my effort and registered under my responsibility. She asked if I had ever signed any document transferring shares to Lucas or to anyone else. I told her no. For a second, I felt almost silly saying it. Of course I had not. The idea had never even entered my mind. She nodded and said that this meant Lucas had no formal ownership, only a position I had given him. Next, she took the house papers. She checked the title, the mortgage history, the clear note that the debt had been paid years ago. There, too, only my name stood as owner. She tilted her head toward the old trust draft and said that this paper, if completed and signed, could create a clear shield around the house. She explained again, slowly, what that shield would do. The trust would keep the house under the control of two people only, me and Anna. It would define who could live there, for how long, and under what conditions. It could allow family to stay as guests, but it would make it clear that they were guests, not co-owners. It would also protect Anna if something truly happened to me, so that nobody could push her around with fast words and forms. As she spoke, I felt that straight line inside me grow clearer. I realized that while Lucas had been playing with the image of power, I had been sitting on the real thing the whole time. I had simply forgotten to look at it because I was busy trying to be a good father and avoid fights. Lena then asked about Lucas's role at the company. I told her that I had given him the title of operations manager and access to certain cards and accounts. She asked to see any formal description of his duties. I laughed quietly and said that his job description was mostly in my head. I had trusted him. She did not smile back at that. She just wrote a note and said that we would need to turn that mental picture into real documents. She laid out the path in front of me, step by step. First, we would define a clear structure at the company. Who had which role, who had access to what, who could sign contracts. Second, we would update the bank so that only people with real responsibility could touch company funds. Third, we would complete and sign the house trust to create a simple but firm protection for our home. She looked me in the eye and said that all of this was my right, not a dramatic act. I was not taking anything away from Lucas that he legally had. I was simply matching the papers to the reality that should have always been there. I left her office with a lighter step than when I arrived. The folder was still under my arm, but now it felt less like a weight and more like a tool. On the way down the stairs, I received a message from the bank confirming my meeting for the next day. Things were moving. The bank building had a cold, polished feeling, but I was used to it. I had signed my first small loan there, hands sweating inside my jacket pockets. This time, my palms were dry. I knew what I was there to do. The bank manager, a calm man with tired eyes, led me into a meeting room with a large table and a glass wall that looked out onto the lobby. He opened his laptop, pulled up my accounts, and waited for my questions. I asked him to show me every card connected to the company account and every person with rights to use it. He did so. On the screen, a list appeared. My name was at the top. Under it, as user, was Lucas. Seeing the list in front of me made the situation easier to grasp. There it was, in simple letters. Who the bank believed was allowed to spend company money. It did not care about family ties, living room talks, or in-law opinions. It only cared about these fields. I told the manager that I wanted to keep the account open as it was, but make some changes. I asked him to set new limits that I alone would define. I asked him to remove all extra cards from active use until further notice. I asked for detailed printed statements of the last months with clear categories of spending. The manager did not question my decisions. He just confirmed my identity, made some clicks, and said that the adjustments would take effect. He added that if I wished, I could request that new cards be issued only in my name. I told him to do that and to mark in the system that I was the only person with the right to request changes. As we finished, I felt a quiet shift. The bank, at least, now saw me again as the center, not as a fading figure behind a new face. It was not anger that moved me, it was a simple desire to align the outer world with the inner reality. Back at home that evening, I went straight to my office again. The cabinet stood open where I had left it. I placed the new bank statements next to the other files and turned on my old computer. Its fan made a soft humming sound, like a kind old machine trying its best. I created new folders on the screen. One I called Company Structure, another I named House Trust, a third one I titled Records Spending. Into these folders, I started to save scanned copies of each important paper. I backed them up on a small USB drive that I had once used for drawings. Now it would carry a different kind of plan. Now, as I worked, I thought about how Lucas would see these actions if he knew. He would probably say that I was trying to block his growth, that I did not trust him. In truth, I was finally doing the basic work I had postponed for too long. I was respecting my own past effort by protecting its form. The next day, I met Matteo at the cafe again. He spread new printouts in front of me and smiled when he noticed that some of the adjustments at the bank were already visible in the system. He said that with these changes, it would be easier to separate what was company spending and what was personal. He pointed at a few lines and said that these past months would still need careful explanation at tax time, but that from now on, we could keep things very clear. He suggested that we also update the company's internal roles on paper. He said that if Lucas wanted a certain title, there should be a clear description of what that title meant and what it did not mean. I agreed. I asked him to help me prepare a simple but firm set of internal documents. They would show that I was still the main owner and director, that Lucas had a normal position like any other employee, and that access to money and contracts followed responsibility, not first names. After our meeting, I walked through the small park near the cafe. Children were playing on the swings. A dog ran in circles chasing a ball. Life went on as if no living room talks, no hidden cards, no in-law councils existed anywhere. It reminded me that my situation, while heavy, was also simple at its core. It was about lines on paper and lines inside my own chest. In the days that followed, life at home looked almost the same on the surface. There were still meals in the kitchen. There were still voices in the hall. Lucas still made big gestures when he told stories. Caroline still liked to comment on what could be improved in the house. Frank still leaned back in chairs like they were all his. But small things had changed. I noticed that when Lucas tried to pay in front of us with the company card, it did not always work. He would frown at his phone, go quiet for a moment, then take out his personal card instead. He did not look at me when that happened. Nora looked quickly between us, but said nothing. At the office, suppliers started to send messages directly to me again. Some said that they were happy to hear my voice. Others asked neutral questions about who exactly would be signing future contracts. I answered clearly, I would. The tone in those talks became steady again. One afternoon, I received a call from Lena's assistant. She said that Lena had gone through all the drafts and that everything was ready for my signature. She invited me to come in on a specific date so that we could finalize the house trust and the company roll documents in one visit. When I went back to Lena's office, she had 2 neat stacks of paper waiting on the table. In one stack were the trust documents for the house. In the other were the updated company rules, including a new formal description of Lucas's position and a standard employment offer for him. Lena walked me through each page. She did not rush. She pointed at each key part and made sure I understood. The trust clearly named me and Anna as the only people with long-term rights in the house. It gave us the ability to invite people to stay, but it did not give those people any claim to space or control. The company papers confirmed that I was the main director and that all important decisions and contracts went through me. She told me that once I signed, her office would send official notices to the necessary parties, the company registry, certain partners, and, if I wished, a copy to Lucas along with his new contract. I picked up the pen and signed one page after another. My hand moved slowly, but without doubt. With each signature, I felt less like a tired father and more like the man who had once walked into a bank with a simple plan and a lot of courage. When we were done, Lena opened her calendar on the desk. She circled a date in the near future and pointed at it. She said that if I wanted these changes to land in a way that could not be twisted, I should choose that day to speak openly. She said that by then, all letters and records would already be in place. I only had to decide where and how I wanted to say the final words. I looked at the red circle on her calendar and thought about all the evenings in my kitchen where others had spoken about our plans without me. Now, for the first time in a long time, the next move would be mine. In the days after I signed the papers at Lena's office, life around me looked almost unchanged. That was the strange part. People still joked in the kitchen, phones still buzzed on the table, the television still played in the evenings. On the surface, the house was the same. Only inside me and inside a few folders in other buildings, things had moved to new places. I knew that if I tried to explain all of it to everyone at once, I would only create noise. So I started with the person who mattered most to me. One afternoon, I asked Anna to meet me in the small park near our home. She looked surprised, but she agreed. It was a clear day, with gray clouds moving slowly above the trees. We sat on a bench that faced the playground. Children ran and shouted around us. A small boy tried to climb a ladder that was too high for him. His father stood close, hands ready, but did not lift him. He just watched and waited. The boy finally reached the platform on his own and laughed. The father smiled and stepped back a little. For some reason, that simple scene stayed with me. I told Anna that I had been to see our lawyer. I did not start with big words. I said that I wanted to make sure she was safe in this house, no matter what others planned in our kitchen. I told her that I had checked all the papers again, that I had not given ownership away to anyone, that the house was still ours on every important line. She looked at me with fear first, as if I had come to tell her something worse. When she understood that I was not talking about some new loss, but about protection, her shoulders relaxed a little. She asked what this meant in everyday life. I told her that it meant nobody could send her away or change her place in this home with fast talk and surprise documents. She asked about Lucas. Her voice was a mixture of worry and loyalty. I said that I was not trying to hurt him. I told her that I had given him chances that many sons do not get. I said that I had no plan to throw him out. I simply wanted clear lines so that our kindness could never again be used as a tool against us. She asked if this would start a big conflict. I answered with simple truth. I said that for a long time, I had accepted quiet disrespect just to avoid open conflict. Now I believed that real peace would not come from silence, but from clear boundaries. I promised her that whatever I did would stay within the rules, that I would not go down to the level of shouting or tricks. She sat for a while without speaking. Then she said that she had felt very small in her own living room lately, that she sometimes avoided entering the kitchen when the others were there. She said she had felt guilty for feeling that way. I told her she did not have to feel guilty for noticing when people stepped on her place. I did not tell her every detail of my plan. I only told her that certain changes were already in motion and that on a certain day soon, everything would become clear. I asked her to trust my sense of timing the way she had trusted my sense of structures when I built this house. She nodded slowly. It was not a happy nod, but it was a firm one. The next step was to coordinate with numbers. I met Matteo again at the small cafe near the office. By then, the changes at the bank were fully active. He showed me on his laptop how the recent spending now stood in clear rows. Company payments were one color, personal payments another. The old confusion had started to fade. He told me that he had prepared a set of simple reports that described the last months. They were not stories. They were just numbers with dates. He said that if any questions came later, we would be able to point to these sheets and say, "Here is what happened, line by line." We also talked about the company structure. He had helped me shape a clear picture on paper. Who was the main director? Who had which title? Who carried which duty? He showed me a draft of a standard contract for Lucas. It was simple and fair. It offered him a clear salary, clear tasks, clear limits. It did not promise him control that he had never earned on paper. I looked at the contract and thought about how he might react. I knew he would see it as a step down from the image in his head, but from the point of view of the company, it was a step toward normal order. I told Matteo to finalize it. He said that once I gave the signal, he would help send the necessary notices. After that meeting, I walked slowly back to my car. On the way, I passed a shop window where my own reflection appeared between two sets of suits on display. For a moment, I did not recognize the man in the glass. He looked older than I felt inside, but his eyes were clearer than they had been for a long time. One evening, not long after, Lucas came home with visible excitement. He gathered everyone in the kitchen and announced that he had reserved a private room in a restaurant for a big family dinner. He said that he wanted to lay out his vision for the future of the house and the company. He wanted everyone present, me, Anna, Nora, her parents. He spoke like a host of an important event. Caroline clapped her hands softly. Frank slapped Lucas on the back and said that this was the kind of leadership he liked to see. Nora smiled and said that it was time for us to hear what they had been planning in more detail. I listened quietly. Inside, I almost smiled. The day Lucas had chosen for his dinner was the same day that Lena had circled on her calendar. By then, all my signatures would already be processed. Letters would be on their way or already delivered. Records would be updated. It was as if he had chosen, with full confidence, the perfect stage for a story he did not know. I told him that I would be there. My voice was neutral. He took my agreement as a sign that I was finally ready to be included in his picture. He said that he was glad I would hear everything officially. For the first time in weeks, he seemed relaxed around me. In the days before the dinner, I moved through my routine with a calm that might have looked strange from the outside. At the office, I checked site reports, visited a construction site, and talked with workers about schedules. They greeted me with the same respect as always. For them, nothing had changed. That gave me quiet strength. I was not some figure fading into the background. In their eyes, I was still the person who knew where to put the steel and where to pour the concrete so that a building would stand. At home, I watched small details with new attention. I noticed how Carolyn walked into the kitchen without knocking, opened cabinets, and commented on where things were kept. I noticed how Frank placed his phone and keys on the table as if it was his own spot. I noticed how Lucas praised himself for small tasks that others had done, and how Anna moved around all of them like a soft shadow. I did not correct anyone in those days. I also did not join their talks about plans. I saved my energy. At night, in my office, I sat with my old cabinet open and my computer on. I checked that the digital copies of all papers were safe on the small USB drive. I answered short messages from Lena and Mateo with simple confirmations. Everything was lined up. On the morning of the dinner, I went to work as usual. There were still things to finish on a site, and I did not want my personal story to harm the workers' schedule. When I returned home in the afternoon, I found Anna standing in the bedroom, holding 2 dresses in her hands. She asked which one looked more suitable for a restaurant. Her voice carried more tension than her words. I told her she looked good in both, but that the darker one might make her feel more comfortable in a room full of bright talk. She smiled faintly and chose that one. Then she looked at me and asked in a low tone if everything was ready. I answered that, on the paper side, nothing more needed to be done. I said that the rest was just words in a room. Before we left, I went into my office for a moment. I did not take any heavy folders with me. That was not needed. The important papers were already in the hands of people who knew how to use them. I only took my phone and checked the last messages. There was one from Lena's assistant, confirming that certain notices had been sent that morning. There was another from Mateo, saying that internal company messages were scheduled to go out the next day. I locked the office door behind me. The small click sounded different this time. It sounded like the end of a long, quiet delay. We drove to the restaurant in 2 cars. Lucas took Nora and her parents. I drove with Anna. The road was not long, but she held her hands folded tightly on her lap the whole way. I told her that whatever happened in that room, we would return to the same house that night, and that the house was still ours in all the ways that mattered. She nodded and watched the buildings pass by outside her window. The restaurant was in the center of town, with big windows and soft lights. Inside, the air smelled of cooked food and polished wood. The host greeted us and led us toward the back, where the private rooms were. On the way, I saw small groups at other tables, laughing, sharing meals, living their own evenings without knowing that a different kind of meal was being prepared in another room. Near the door of the private room, I stopped for a second. Anna walked ahead and went inside. I told her I would join in a moment. She looked at me with a question in her eyes, but did not ask it aloud. The host moved aside to give me space. I stood in the narrow space near the entrance and took out my phone. There, on the screen, were 2 fresh messages. One was from Lena. It said that all documents were now fully registered and that the changes were active. The other was from Mateo. It said that the company records were updated and that he would inform staff at the right time. I put the phone back in my pocket and took a slow breath. My heart did not race. It beat in a steady way, like a metronome. I adjusted my jacket, placed my hand on the door handle of the private room, and pushed it open to walk into the place where my son believed he would explain his future to me. When I stepped into the private room, everyone was already seated. Lucas stood at the head of the table, next to a whiteboard the restaurant staff had placed for him. He had drawn a few boxes and arrows on it, like a simple plan. At the center of his drawing, in big letters, was the word future. He welcomed us all and said that this evening was about clarity. He wanted everyone on the same page, he said. He spoke with warmth, but also with that slight edge of someone who believes the result is already decided. He started with the house. He pointed at one box on the board and said that this house should become the main home for him, Nora, and her parents. He described how they would redesign part of the ground floor into a permanent wing for Caroline and Frank. He spoke about moving some of our things into storage to free up space. He mentioned that later, maybe Anna could move into a smaller room upstairs if it felt more practical. I watched Anna's face as he said that last part. Her lips pressed together. She did not speak. Then Lucas moved to the company. He talked about rebranding, about fresh leadership, about how clients like to see a young figure at the front. He told everyone that he was already presenting himself as the main decision-maker and that he wanted to make it official. He said that he would handle contracts, money, and strategy. He left my role in his drawing as a small box at the side labeled Consult. When he finished, there was a moment of quiet. Caroline smiled and said that this sounded organized. Frank said that this was how a modern family business should look. Nora put her hand on Lucas's arm and told him that she was proud. Then Lucas looked at me and asked what I thought. He expected either a protest he could frame as fear or a quiet, tired nod. He was ready for either. He was not ready for the third option. I told him that I was glad he liked plans. I said that I also had made a plan, but I had done it on a different kind of board. I reached into my inside pocket and took out a thin folder. I did not spread all the pages on the table. I simply placed it in front of me and rested my hand on it. I told them that as of that morning, the house no longer stood simply as a property under my single name. It now sat inside a trust with two controllers, me and Anna. I explained calmly that this trust clearly defined who had a right to live there long term. That list had two names only. Everyone else, including Nora's parents and even Lucas, was a guest for as long as we agreed it was good for the home. Caroline's smile faded. She asked what that meant for their wing. I said there would be no permanent wing. I said that Anna and I had not agreed to turn our home into a base for another couple. I added that we still welcomed visits, but not an occupation. Then I spoke about the company. I told Lucas that I had reviewed the registration again with our lawyer. I reminded him, in front of everyone, that I was still the only founder and main shareholder. I explained that this fact was now reflected not just in the registry, but also in new internal documents. I told him that his role had been put into a standard contract. It described his duties as an employee, not as a ruler. It offered him a clear salary for clear work and no free path to company funds. I informed him that his access to cards had already been removed at the bank and that any future personal spending would have to come from his own account. Frank leaned forward and asked if I was serious. I answered that the bank, the registry, and our accountant were all very serious. I said that letters had already been sent and changes already registered. This dinner was not to ask permission. It was a courtesy to inform them in words, since the papers were already speaking. Lucas's face went pale, then flushed. He said that I could not suddenly do this. I replied that nothing about it was sudden. I had built this house and this company over decades. I had simply allowed talk around my table to get ahead of the paperwork. Now the papers had caught up. I turned to Anna and said, in front of everyone, that she would never be moved to a smaller room against her will. I said that she decided with me who stayed in our home and for how long. Then I looked back at Lucas and told him that he was welcome to stay as our son if he could live with simple respect and clear rules. If not, he was free to build his own house and company, just as I had. The room fell quiet. No one reached for their glasses. No one looked at the whiteboard with its arrows and boxes. All the sound in the world, for a moment, was the soft hum of the restaurant outside and the faint vibration of my phone in my pocket, carrying a new message from the office that the staff had received the update and understood who their director was. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and told them that the food was ordered, that I hoped they would enjoy the meal, and that Anna and I would be leaving early. Then I walked toward the door, feeling every step as firm as the ground under a well-built foundation.